Everyone should have their Bibles open to Exodus chapter 1. Start here with the birth of Moses. So we're transitioning from the time where we left off, where Jacob and Joseph were in the land of Egypt and they both died. Now I asked a question on that sheet there. Approximately, if you did a little bit of studying, how many years were there between the time of Joseph until the birth of Moses? Amber? 300. Now, some of you wrote 400, and that's a good answer, but there's a little discrepancy there. And the reason is most scholars believe that between the time of Joseph and then the time of Moses rising to his position as leader of the Israelites is 400 years, and that's true. Problem is, we're talking about his birth. So we know that he was in the house of Pharaoh learning for 40 years, and then he was in the wilderness learning for 40 years. So that's 80 years. So 300 years plus 80 is approximately 400. So I did see quite some 400s in there, and that was okay because you did some good research there. But if you do a little bit of math subtract, it's been about 300 years. That's where we're going. So there's a time period in here the Bible doesn't cover. It doesn't tell us what was going on in Egypt. Now we can surmise a few things, okay, about those 300 years, and we'll do that here. But let's first read the first 10 verses of chapter 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, and Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. So that means everyone that age died. Okay, Joseph and his 11 brothers. The children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty. And the land was filled with them. What land was filled with them? Be clear here, not Egypt, but Kenton. Goshen, the land of Goshen. Good. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph, and he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of this land. So we're going to stop there. So, like we said, there was a period of 300 years. What was happening during that 300 years here in Egypt? Well, we know some things. What did the text say? What did happen? Megan? Okay, the brothers and Joseph, they died probably in that first 100 years. What else happened, Brody?
The people of Israel grew and multiplied.
All right, they had many children. Here's where we start to see the multiplication. We think of Abraham. He only had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob and Esau. Jacob had the 12 sons. And now we see that exponential growth all of a sudden. Very good. They multiplied. They were exceeding in number. So much so that the number of them appears from the text compared to the Egyptians. What? If you compare the number of Israelites to the Egyptians, it appears from the way that the talk is going in the text at Kenton. Yeah, the number of Israelites are greater than the number of Egyptians here. Okay? Now, the land of Goshen. What did we say? Why was it a good land for the Israelites when they first got there, for the sons of Jacob? Jaden? All right, it was a rich land. We talk of the land of Canaan flowing with milk and honey. This too would be a land like that. It was green. The pastures were rich and lush, so that cattle grew and the riches of the people of Israel grew and they could grow good crops. This was a wonderful land to live in. This is not the kind of land you would want to leave. Okay? Sometimes it can be hard to leave something that's good. This was a place that would have been hard to leave. In fact, the Israelites rather enjoyed it here. Many of them probably forgot about that promise about the land of Canaan, and they thought, now, why don't we make this our homeland? This is such a beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful, rich place. Let's stay here. And they were becoming comfortable there. in that comfort, there was a danger that also was going on. Things started happening between some of the Israelites and some of the Egyptians. What began to happen, do you think, between some of the Egyptians and some of the Israelites? Joe? Well, that's one way of looking at it. They had some disagreements. I guess I'm looking for some positive things here. Well, maybe not positive from our sight, but from the people's standpoint, what were some things? Amber?
They started marrying like Egyptian women.
Mixed marriages. Some of the Israelitish girls. Well, look at those handsome Egyptian men. Say, boy, they're attractive. And they tried to make themselves appear attractive to those men. And the men of Egypt would come and marry them. Or the reverse. The men of the Israelites would look out and see the Egyptian women and think, now those are beautiful women. And they would go to talk to them and interact with them. And soon you had this mixing of the lives of the Egyptians and the Israelites, what we call the mixed multitude, because their marriages were mixed. Now you had the difficulty. What are you going to do with these children that are born from these mixed marriages? Are they going to grow up in Egypt? Are they going to grow up in Goshen? Are they going to obey the lifestyle that's been properly deemed by God? Or are they going to live in an Egyptian lifestyle? They began to worship those idols and gods. They were becoming comfortable in the land. They enjoyed it there. It was a nice place to live. Because of that comfort, they were beginning to walk and live in sin. So what does God do often? What do we see in many Bible stories? When nations begin to live in sin, when they begin to get too comfortable, what does God do then to those nations? Amber?
He punishes them.
Yeah, how does he punish them? Maybe you were going to say that, Kenton. Could destroy them. Now, we know he won't destroy this people because he'd be destroying the elect line. So how can he punish them here? What can he do? Jen?
The Egyptians put them in bondage.
All right. That's what we begin to see in verse 10 here. The Egyptians are really only an instrument. They are a tool of God because God sees the Israelites becoming comfortable. God sees these mixed marriages. And so God makes it so that the lives of the Israelites become difficult. The lives of the Israelites become miserable. And when they become difficult and miserable, what do they want to do? Now how do they view the land of Goshen? How do they begin to view the land now that it's a difficult place, a miserable place to live? What do they want to do? Amber? Leave. God uses the Egyptians as instruments in his hands to make the lives of the Israelites difficult. We see there in verse 10, because the multitude is becoming large, the Pharaoh becomes concerned. He sees that they're beginning to grow and multiply. Let us do something. Because if these Israelites continue to grow and multiply, maybe the Philistines will come down and attack us. And the Israelites will say, well, let's be on the side of the Philistines so that we can own the land or that we could leave. Pharaoh's very concerned about that. So they begin here, we'll see that in verse 11, how God begins to work here. Okay? Verse 11, therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. The bondage that they had to do was to be servants, slaves. They had to make bricks, bake bricks that could be used into building these cities and building up the rich palaces or the storehouses for Pharaoh. That was some of the work they had to do. Okay? They had to work in the fields, probably harvesting the grains and carrying the water in from the rivers and streams on the shoulders. Hot, hard work in this desert. Okay? They built these two great cities, Ramses and Pithom. Now Pharaoh was hoping what would happen when these men and women began to work so much. What would begin to happen to the Israelites if he made them work so hard? Colin? Maybe some of the older, the weaker ones would die. Their bodies would give out. They wouldn't live as long. That's one thing he was hoping would happen. What else could maybe affect them? Maybe they, Amber? Become sick. Become weary, tired. They would become so tired they wouldn't have the number of children they were having. But that's not the case here. Remember Jacob with Uncle Laban? He said, I'll take the ring straked and the spot. I'll take what looks bad. And God blessed him in that way, so that those began to multiply and richly increase. Well, the same thing happens here in Egypt. The opposite of what Pharaoh wants to happen. The more he makes the people work, the harder they have to work, the more children they have, the more blessed they become. And the number of Israelites continues to increase and multiply. This is not what Pharaoh wants. So he needs a backup plan. And that's here in verse 15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the other named Puah. And he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. The king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives. The people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. So Pharaoh begins the work of murder. Now this Pharaoh, we must also point out, is not the Pharaoh who was friendly with Joseph. Probably another line of kings took over. Maybe it was a coup, a military type takeover, or maybe in some way a new family came to power. Not familiar with the history here of the Egyptians. But a new Pharaoh comes to power. And this is a Pharaoh that doesn't know about Jacob and Joseph. He doesn't care about them. He doesn't remember how they had helped to save the people of Egypt. All they care about is the Israelites are too great in number. And this is a wicked, sinful man who commits and orders the people to commit murder. He tells these midwives here, to the midwives of the Israelites, these are the women who helped the women when they were born. He said, if a boy comes out, kill it. Can't imagine the atrocity that must have been. But save the girls. But the midwives did not obey. They chose to obey God rather than Pharaoh. They obeyed him, and in that way they were greatly blessed. We might say that's disobedience. But I asked you on your sheets there to find a verse. What verses did you come up with? There were some different ones. Brody?
Acts 5 verse 29, you ought to obey God rather than men.
Yeah, that's probably the most well-known one that fits really well here. Acts 5 verse 29. If you didn't have that written down there, put that down. It'll be something that'll be good on a test. Acts 5 verse 29. Peter tells the rulers we ought to obey God rather than man. God said not to kill. Pharaoh says to kill. We must obey God and not Pharaoh. And so God blessed these midwives there in their disobedience of Pharaoh because they obeyed God. Okay? So because that didn't work, what did Pharaoh order next? How else shall we try to get rid of these boys? What else could we order to do? Jen? Toss the baby boys into the river. And he knows the midwives, he can't count on them to do that. Okay? He can't count on them to do that. Instead, because we see later on of what happens in the home of Moses when he's born, that his mother is concerned about the soldiers, and there are spies now walking throughout the land of Goshen, listening in for babies to be crying. And when they hear those babies, these spies and these guards and these men come bursting into the homes, looking at the young child crying. Is it a boy? Then they probably snatch it from the mother, and off they run to the river and throw that baby into the river. Again, what treachery, what horrible things to think about. But that's exactly what Pharaoh wanted. But even then, this wasn't working. And we see what happens with Moses here, how his parents obey, yet disobey Pharaoh. Chapter 2, let's read there. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. When she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags of the river's bank. And his sisters stood afar off, to wit what would be done to him. So they obeyed Pharaoh. They took the child and they put it in the Nile River. They just didn't kill their son. Now we know they have an older daughter, and also we later learned an older son named Aaron. Those two must have been born probably before this decree went out. So they take this child and they put it in a basket made out of bulrushes, a lightweight type of reed, and weed found alongside the rivers. And then they daub it with pitch and slime, kind of an oil-based thing that repels water, that will keep the little ark here from leaking. And they set the ark on the side of the river. They kind of hide it probably in the other bulrushes and tall weeds, and leave it there floating in the water. And obviously they can't just leave the baby there day in and day out, but it's going to need food and water, milk and everything else, so they somehow, some way must care for the child. We don't read about how that must have gone on. But then let's see what happens. How is he found out? Verse 5, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. God is working here in the heart of this princess, of this daughter of Pharaoh, so that she has compassion when the baby cries. She doesn't immediately think, well, see here, I found someone trying to disobey my father's command, and I will drown the baby myself, or dunk it, and father will be pleased with me. No, rather, God works in her heart so that when that baby cries, she immediately feels compassion. And rather than wanting to destroy the child, she wants to keep him. God is at work here. Verse 7, then said his sister, so Miriam, who was standing nearby, saw what was happening, and she being one to think very quickly on her feet, she runs down to the crowd standing around the baby, and she says to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And the maid went, and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. The child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, because I drew him out of the water. So, we see here how God works. Now this child, this young child, being looked at by Pharaoh's daughter and her maids around her, all looking in, probably thinking how cute he is, and oohing and eyeing over him. And then comes this young Hebrew girl saying, what have you found? How can I help? And she maybe waits, or she listens, and she hears them over talking. Well, what shall we do with this baby? What are we going to do? It's a Hebrew child. And so she pipes up and says, well, I know what you could do. I know a woman, a Hebrew woman, who has just given birth, and she could care for the child. She could give the child milk and raise it. Pharaoh's daughter thinks, now this sounds like a good idea. She probably doesn't want to have to stay up late at night dealing with a crying child. But more importantly here, it's God's plan that Moses can grow up in a good godly home. And he can learn the stories and the ways of God and God's people from his parents. And so it works out here. The young girl runs to her mother and sets up an arrangement so that Pharaoh's daughter gives the child so that he can be brought up there. She probably knows who the house is. She makes sure that this woman receives wages. So not only does the mother get to now raise her own son, Moses, just how she would like to have, but now she's also getting paid to do that by Pharaoh's house, through Pharaoh's daughter. So it's a great blessing to them. You can see how God is working here. And that young Moses, named by Pharaoh's daughter, meaning taken out of the water, he gets to grow up in a godly home as opposed to an ungodly home. He grows up in a home where God is taught and instructed. God is working here to keep Moses safe so that he's not destroyed. God is working here so that he can raise up this young Moses to be a great leader of the people. Excuse me. Okay. Now, looking at some of the questions here, I think we covered most of them there. We said approximately how many years? 300. This Pharaoh was not one who knew God or really cared about the people of Israel. He was more afraid of them. Okay, we talked about the concern. Now, how is the devil using Pharaoh in this lesson? What is the devil trying to do here? Amber?
He's trying to get rid of those people so Christ will.
All right, let's cut off the line of Christ. If we destroy all the baby boys, you don't care about the girls, if we destroy all the baby boys, the line of Christ can't come. And so that is what the devil is trying to do here. He's using Pharaoh as his instrument to kill all these babies, whereas God is using Pharaoh as his instrument, in a sense, to make the people hate Egypt, to want to leave it, so that when the time comes, they'll be more than willing to leave because they're sick and tired of all that work. It's no longer a life of great comfort there. Okay? So, then I asked that last question, in what way do you not have the patience or faith to wait on God sometimes? And that was the problem of the people here. They're probably sick and tired of working already and wanted to go, but they're going to have to wait another 80 years. And it was going to get more difficult. Moses had to learn patience too, eventually we'll see as well. So, in what way do we not have the patience or faith to wait on God sometimes? Well, there's probably lots of examples. Maybe we want something to happen sooner rather than later. Maybe we know of something coming up that mom and dad have planned that's a special day, an enjoyable day, and we can barely contain ourselves. Okay? Or maybe we knew a package was coming in the mail, and we ask every day, when's it coming, mom and dad? When's it coming? Until we realize we've become annoying and that we should maybe be patient and wait until mom and dad tell us. Okay? There's so many different things in life that we can learn to be patient about. I need to be patient to wait for Christ to come again. I want him to come now. I want it to be done and over with. But God is in control. And he's teaching me patience. So that is a beautiful thing that we can learn and see here too, and talk about that too much. But the people of Israel probably needed to learn a great deal of patience to wait for God to deliver them.